Welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. Our guest today is Ashish Dave, the CEO of Mirae Asset Venture Investments. He's been an investor and board member in such companies as Ola, BigBasket, Shadowfax, and Zolo. We have plenty to talk about today regarding startups and investing, so let's get started. Welcome, Ashish. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Roshan. It's my pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Okay, maybe to begin things, you could take us through your journey in brief and also talk about your current role with the venture business at Mirae India.
Sure. So I think I started with being a product manager in one of the early fintech companies in India. It was 2007 to 2011. After that, I went and did my MBA in IE Business School. After MBA, I came back to India and I started working with Mumbai Angels, which is one of the largest angel networks in India. After 2 years stint at Mumbai Angels, I moved on to Kalaari and I worked with Kalaari for 4 years. I did early stage investments at Kalaari, some of the deals like Upstocks, Cashkaro, Truebil, worked on Vyome and multiple other transactions up there. After Kalaari, I moved to Mirae Asset in 2018. That's where I was given a mandate to set up the entire venture capital business for Mirae Asset in India. It's been 2 years, 2.5 years since I joined. And what we've done is in these 2.5 years, we have deployed or committed approximately 180 to $200 million in India, right? I'll give you a little bit background about Mirae Asset, what they are. Mirae Asset is South Korea's #1 financial services firm, and we manage around $415 billion of assets under management.
Wow.
We've been in India for the last 12 years in the public market side. We grew our public markets AUM from $50 million to today $7 billion. Mirae Assets are among the top performing mutual funds in India. Our thesis at Mirae Asset Venture Investments is to invest into growth opportunities, which is Series B onwards. For Mirae Asset Venture Investments, we have around 1.5 billion worth of capital available, which we invest out of in Southeast Asia. We have multiple funds. The largest fund is Mirae Asset Neighbor Asia Growth Fund. We made 4 investments until now, and we actually made 5 investments, which is Ola, BigBasket, Shadowfax, Zolo, and Zomato. And there's one more investment that's in pipeline. So this is the journey so far.
Fantastic. So can you help us understand a little more about the venture business? I mean, I know people vaguely do understand, LPs and IRRs and whatever, right? So you've had this opportunity to set it up from scratch, right? So what was that like?
So it was very interesting because see, this is the first time a South Korean financial services firm is setting up a venture business in India. You have a lot of South Korean investors in India, but they aren't based out of India. We are actually based out of India. We have a team in India which helps scouts opportunities, makes cases on those opportunities, presents it to global IC. In terms of fundraise, we didn't have to do too much in terms of fundraise because most of the money that we draw it from our balance sheet. And we do have some strategic LPs with whom we get into these, create these funds, right? Mirae Asset Neighbor is actually a fund with Neighbor, which is, you can call Google of South Korea. We have Mirae Asset GS Retail Fund, which is a fund we have set up with GS Retail, which is one of the largest retail networks back in South Korea. And we have a similar fund, which is called Mirae Asset Celltrion Fund, which is a life sciences fund, with Celltrion, which is one of the life sciences company in South Korea. So that's how we do. The first year included setting up a strategy. What should we pursue? We felt the early stage investors are doing an exceptional job, good job. But for the Indian venture ecosystem, we felt there's a need to be in the growth stage because growth capital was limited. It wasn't, we didn't have too much of growth capital, and more importantly, on-ground team, on-ground, I would say, presence of growth investors was very limited. There were investors who would come, probably make some investments, go back, then they would not be there for a couple of years and they'll again come back. We wanted to make sure that we are there for a long term, and every year we are making some investments. That was the view, and we felt this is the space to get in. we do feel that there is a lot of value to be created by coming into growth companies, uh, because India is a market which is still underpenetrated. So when we come into companies which are even highly valued, we still feel there is a lot of value to be created. And the other function is to basically take these companies or invest into these companies when they're private, and still continue to hold them while they go public, and make value and make returns for our shareholders, uh, for our LPs, when the companies go from private to public, right?
Right.
One of the key things to look for, what we look into an opportunity is, we like to invest in massive markets. So if you take BigBasket, Ola, Zomato, Shadowfax, or Zolostays, or the other company that we are looking to invest, all of them are large and massive markets, right? And we like to come into category leaders. So these are few points that we kept in mind while setting up the structure.
Right. No, you brought up a very relevant point, which is that the seed and Series A activity in India has exploded over the last 5 or 10 years. But we seem to still, I mean, apart from Sequoia, Axel, and so on, we still rely on, the likes of, let's say, a Tiger or Naspers or whoever it is coming in for the growth stage funds as such, right? So it's pretty
Yeah,
interesting to talk about that. Um,
yeah.
Especially given that our domestic market itself is so huge, right? I mean, we have a billion plus people. It
Hmm.
does merit this growth stage investments as such, right? I mean, so do you see that growing as well? I mean, the more such funds coming into India.
Yes, I think in if you just take this year, there have been funds that have come to India which you wouldn't have heard of, right? I think we are aware of those funds because we are in the venture business, we are in the growth business, right? So some of these investors, they are coming to India for the first time. Why are they coming to India for the first time? Because they do see an opportunity now, right? So definitely there is need for growth capital. You will see a lot of volume in terms of number of early stage funds, but a good amount of growth investors are still needed for the ecosystem to grow. See, India is a large market. It's not a homogeneous market. It's a heterogeneous market. To expand into a market like India, the depth and the breadth, right? You need to have too much of capital also to sort of well penetrate into these markets. There are a lot of competitors. There are a lot of ideas. There are a lot of business models that you have to fund. Growth capital is very, very critical for them. And I think more of these investors, I would say, are welcome, because that's how you will build an ecosystem, right? And again, I don't see these businesses or these investors as competitors. There are sometimes I would say, co-invest alongside alongside these funds. There are sometimes we look at these funds and look at their portfolio companies to invest into their follow-on rounds. So I think it's fairly a collaborative space to be in.
Yeah.
It's not a very what do I say? We don't see them as competitors.
Right.
So more the merrier. More, it's good for the venture ecosystem.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense, right? Because at the growth stage, I mean, you can split checks anyway. I mean, it's not like a seed or
Yeah.
Series A even where I mean, disproportionately one person takes the lead, right? So as a growth stage investor, the way you kind of make money as a fund is when you see some of your investments go through to IPOs and so on. Now, there's been a lot of talk about how Indian companies. You mentioned Zomato earlier, right? Which can go IPO. So, how do you see a path to IPO for an Indian company at this point of time?
See, I think 2015, 16, people would talk about IPOs. You know, it would have been good if companies went IPO at that point in time. But I think the market conditions or overall the company conditions were not suitable for them to be IPO. By this, what I mean is companies were still burning a lot of capital. And when they're burning a lot of capital, public market investors or retail investors are not someone, they will fancy these stocks. Uh, Today in 2020, the environment is slightly different. Uh, Today the companies are far more efficient. I think I don't need to tell anybody that, hey, you can place an order on an app and get food. I had to sell that idea in 2015 and 2016. Today, I think the adoption is very natural. Of course, COVID has pushed most of its adoption by force. But uh, even despite that, when you just resume to a normal activity when market opens up, right? Lockdown, everything opens up. People are still going to keep ordering stuff on their own because they have experienced the convenience of it. So the forced adoption is now going to be more like an adoption by choice post this period, which means companies are going to be more efficient, and efficient companies means the path to IPO is relatively better. So the probability of companies going IPO right now is much higher as compared to what it was. Do I say there will be IPOs? Of course, there will be. Uh, but again, IPOs are not just, not just, I want an IPO, so an IPO will happen. An IPO means, you have to go through the entire drill. You have to have bankers, you have to have road shows, you have to market the IPO. You have to have anchors who will support the IPO. The market conditions have to be favorable. So there are multiple things that go into, pulling that juggernaut. It's not easy, but there has to be that process because ideally that is the most critical piece which is missing today in the Indian venture ecosystem. Right, early stage investors probably will take secondaries and take exit, but what about the growth guys who come in later? Right, people like us, we will only get that massive liquidity from capital markets. And the other important part is, of course, it's not that what I'm saying is easy and done. There are a lot of factors that will come into regulations, policies, market structures, right? Are they suitable to sort of get listed on BSE, NSE, or there needs to be an alternative tech exchange like the way Nasdaq is there. But at least there has to be some conversation that all the stakeholders should start having, so that the direction, at least we are heading in the right direction, and direction to sort of go IP. And
Right.
the most important point is, where is Indian retail investors and domestic investors in this tech story? How are they participating? You need to provide opportunity to them to sort of participate in these stories, because that's where the new wealth will be created. Reliance story or Infosys story is something very, very famous, right? Every investor or retail investor in Reliance or Infosys has to make money. But what about retail investors making money in some of the tech companies, right? That's the future. That's where if you see Nasdaq or you see Dow Jones and S&P, most of the new market cap that has been created in new age tech companies. And we feel that Indian companies are now ready to sort of go an IPO. In the next 2 to 3 years, we will see multiple IPOs, the large
Right.
one.
Right. Yeah. You made this point about companies.
There are companies which.
Sorry, you were saying?
No, I'm saying I can't name which are the companies which will go IPO because each company has a different timeline. Each company has different intents,
Right.
etc. But at a broad level, I would say a lot of companies are planning at this point in time.
Yeah. So a couple of things have come around, right? I mean, in terms of like internet companies, you saw, for example, Zomato put out numbers, and their burn rate has, I don't know, less than halved actually, compared to last year. And also some of the markets and some of the services that they're sort of in at this point of time, as you mentioned, I mean, consumers are well aware, right? I mean, today, whether it's like, food ordering or whether it's whatever else, cabs, etc. I mean, people are quite uh, understand this at scale, right? But there's also this component of regulators, right? So it isn't easy to list in India because of some of these regulations as well. So I think you have to be profitable for 3 years. You should have a certain amount of turnover, etc., etc. Do you see?
I think
Yeah, how do you see that impacting the companies that want to enlist?
so. One thing I think the fine print is still that everybody is expecting, and I think there will be some consultations where I think they will talk to other stakeholders and come up with a fine print. Regarding 3 years profitability and all that stuff, I think there have been certain clarifications from at least what I read, and I know, and again, I'm not sure if how uh, true they are, but I think if there is a good amount of institutional shareholding, then these things can be waived off, right? If there is 75% of institutional shareholding, then these things can be waived off. So there are, I would say, directionally we are moving. We are fully not there yet. But at least from what we see, the tone of the government and the regulators and the policymakers, it's directionally positive. So we will see some action in probably some couple of months or probably a year or so. And by that time, companies will tend to benefit from those regulatory changes. I think at this point in time, we all are dealing with the bigger problem, which is COVID and getting out of COVID. So hence, um, probably this is not taking too much of precedence.
Right. So if I were to, push back on that and say, what would your top three regulatory, wishes be, policy or regulatory wishes
See,
from
I
an
think
IPO perspective?
one of the most important thing is I think you have to you know you have to create an alternative market structure. We do not know yet, right? I do not know yet if the current structure or the current market structure or the current exchanges are good enough for technology stocks. Um, I do not think the SME exchange is a right exchange to sort of get stocks listed. To go and tell a big, a multi-billion-dollar startup and say, "Hey, are you an SME?" They will simply say, "No, right? You're not an SME." But you need to have at the same time right kind of market structures for it. And when I say market structures, you need to have right kind of analysts. You need to have right kind of buy-side investors on that particular exchange. You need to have some relaxed corporate governance measures because they can't be subjected to the same traditional rules that have been subjected to because they're high growth, they are highly inventive. So sometimes there will be certain losses, right? So you need to have a very specialized set of investors and rules for that. Again, the fine print is too hard to sort of guess at this point in time. But I think government has to work with the exchanges and the regulator to set up certain specific market structures for tech stocks. That's one thing that I feel. And that's what we have seen in NASDAQ, right? I was just discussing with one of my colleagues last week about, on a panel, that NASDAQ has solved for this problem by, sometimes these companies, the promoter shareholding is going to be very low, right? Or probably they're going to be professionally managed companies. So who do you classify as promoters? What about all the institutional shareholders? Their shares can't be locked in. What about the free float? How much will the free float be there? So there are a lot of fine points, right? So I think there has to be a broad policy at a market structure level and it can be jointly come up with, I think regulator and exchanges can come up with that along with the Ministry of Finance and the stakeholders from the venture ecosystem.
Right.
I think apart from that, probably you make, some tax reforms on these tech companies where, I think there have been reforms on the angel tax front, but there should be also be some reform in terms of investments, primary investments into these companies, which is mostly, I think, LTV driven. Why do I say it? See, because primary investment in these companies lead to a good amount of job creation, good amount of economic development. It is not just secondary sales or secondary buying or selling happening, right? So when you buy a stock on Bombay Stock Exchange or National Stock Exchange, the money doesn't go to the company, but money comes here directly into the company. So there is, you have to give some incentive for the primary inclusion. You have to incentivize these long-term growth capital investors to sort of invest into these things. But again, that is not directly listed related to the IPO thing. But if you create a structure like that where primary issuances are subject to certain tax reforms, why not? I think these are a few things that come to my mind. But apart from that, there are a lot of finer points into it, which is, I would say, a little early stage at this point.
Right. So what do you make of this recent talk of dual listing as such?
So I think the recent document that I saw about dual listing, the clarification that has come is actually a welcome clarification because the companies can choose to get dually listed, but not compulsorily, right? Which means the capital pool, the float will not be split between two different markets. There will otherwise liquidity gets split in two different markets. So I think it's a welcome thing.
And twice the paperwork as well.
See, as I said, I think it is up to people if they feel they want to dually list, they can, right? It is not compulsory, right? Uh, I do not know if there are more further clarifications that have come yet, but my reading says that I think it's a benefit. It's a good step. It's a step in a good direction.
Right. So, Ashish, you've seen, the entire spectrum of capital allocation, right? I mean, seed with Mumbai Angels, early stage with Kalaari, and now growth with Mirae. I wonder if you can talk about that. How does, capital allocation vary in each of these stages? in terms of expectations, impact, and so on from an investor perspective?
Correct. So I think at seed stage, broadly what you're looking at is high risk, right? So you create a very well diversified large portfolio, right? As an investor, what you really look at is the team. You look at the opportunity, right? I think, and probably the product, and in what shape the product is. Small amount of proof of concept, right? Or maybe if not proof of concept, that the idea makes sense, and is the idea consistent with the team, right, and the market. And you take multiple of these bets, right? And you write small checks over there. So that's probably the seed stage thing, right? Where a lot of emphasis is based on the founders and their ability to sort of execute, whether they will be able to execute or not. At early stage, I think you just move one step ahead and you have some numbers and some proof of concept in terms of how they have executed from seed to Series A, and whether the founders have managed to get the product market fit. Have they managed to get the product rolling out in multiple markets, not just one market? And when I say multiple markets, I don't mean multiple countries, but let's say multiple cities. Have they rolled out into multiple cities? Have they scaled it to a particular size or no? And then probably yes. Now Series A checks are probably in the range of 5 million to 10 million, 15 million, right? Earlier they were $3 to $5 million, right? So again, over there, you will create a diversified portfolio with a good amount of mortality in case some of these companies do not succeed. At growth, it's very different. At growth, we don't really look at with of course founding team is core, but we also look how strong is the second level management team, right? Whether they have built a robust second level management team or not, right? Whether they have really, the product has, gone through most of the iteration and the product market fit is established. And there are not too many product iterations that they have to do, or, I still do not know what the product could be. That is the stage where we come into, and where the capital is purely needed into go deeper into multiple markets, right? There could be some adjacent growth markets that they would want to get into and experiment in those markets. That's totally okay, but that's where, so our risk profile or risk return is fairly low. So we come into companies which are already well established. There is no corporate governance issues. There are no teething issues, if I may just say, and hence our expectations are slightly different. And hence, our portfolio is also smaller. It's very concentrated portfolio as compared to seed and early stage, where it's very diversified portfolio. And what happens in seed and early stage is, out of, let's say, 20 companies you invest, the ones that succeed, they get follow-on capital. The ones that don't succeed do not get follow-on capital. While in our case, I think almost all the companies that we invest, the mortality rate is very low. You do not want more than one company out of four to fail, right? While here you expect only 5 out of 20 companies to sort of succeed, right? Or 15 will fail. So it's slightly different, and also because the check sizes that we write are larger, right, at growth. So I think this is what you keep in mind while building a capital allocation model in multiple of these stages.
Right. And considering that the pool you evaluate itself is such a rarefied pool, right? I mean, so few of these companies will sort of qualify based on the parameters that you mentioned. Is there, can you have some sort of a sector focus at all? I mean, if so, can you talk about few of the opportunities you're excited by?
Yeah, so you can have a sector focus. So see, what happens is, at early stage, you're supposed to decide very quickly, right? At growth stage, you take a good amount of time doing diligence because there are numbers to do diligence on. On early stage, what do I diligence? Because there are hardly some numbers. There are probably, 1 year balance sheet or 1 year financials or some numbers.
Yeah.
While at growth, I have 2 to 3 years of operational performance. So I have to do that diligence. I have to go speak to a lot of other people, do a lot of market study. In that process, you end up meeting a lot of other competitors. You speak to them, you get their numbers, and then you pick the best out of it, and then make an investment. So a good amount of time for us goes in doing diligence, right? And when you do diligence, you automatically develop some experience and some expertise in the sector. Um, for us, I think how we leverage sector expertise also is what we have invested in overseas market or other markets. We try and bring those those investment experience while evaluating opportunities here. So We had invested in a food tech company, delivery company in back in Europe. We tried to, bring those concepts while evaluating Zomato. We also, got in touch with our China team, our Korea team, when it comes to, food delivery, how those markets have worked. We try to sort of, put that knowledge while making that investment. But same happened in the case of BigBasket. We had invested in Market Curly in South Korea, which is one of the largest grocery platforms. Happy Fresh and some of the other grocery platforms in Indonesia. We try to bring that knowledge and invest in these things. When it comes to fintech companies, financial services firms, so we understand lending really well. So when we look at any other companies, we bring certain domain knowledges, certain domain experts, and then accordingly make these investments. And mostly we only go for these massive sectors or the large sectors, right? And we do bring wherever we don't have expertise, we bring extra people or external people or advisors to sort of help us in helping us build that
Right.
thesis.
Right. And from your perspective, what is that competitive advantage that Mirae has, or typically any growth stage fund has over any of the other funds in the market? If you were to pitch to a startup, so what would that be?
Yeah, I think I'll be very candid. I think we do not have, or no growth investor has any special differentiation. It's just the dollar, right? It's the capital that they bring. Now, in terms of value, I think what a lot of existing growth investors, what they bring is because they've been in India, they've been in markets for quite some time. They've been seasoned players, right? So they have seen a lot of things. So probably at board level, they add a lot of value, right? We do not add that amount of value. I'll be very candid because we are fairly new. I'm fairly young, right? I don't have that experience. But what we also bring is, geopolitically de-risked capital, is, the South Korean capital, that capital, right? What we also bring is, let's say, when it comes to financial services, we bring some experience from our financial services group, right? So for fintech founders, probably we do bring some value. For other investments, I think max what we bring is some of our investment experience that we have done in other markets. That's what we bring. Apart from that, I would be very candid. There's no other value that investor brings. I think my view is very simple. The founder and the management team know things much more than the investor. Our job is just to pick the right team and the right market.
Yeah.
If I have to do everything, right, then probably I should invest in myself, right? Wouldn't that be the case? So I think I'll be very candid. If any investor says that they add a lot of value, I think the only value they can add is on being on board, connecting to other investors, connecting to other peers, helping in hiring. I think these are just few things that people can do. I don't think there is anything else that we would do. We are, I would say, just 2.5 years into India. Um, it's going to take some time for us to build that credibility. I think we are just leveraging on the credibility that we have built in public markets and purely on a lineage. But there is still a long way to go for us.
Right. I think that's a fair generalization of growth stage funds in general. I feel at that stage, I mean, you're really looking at, backing a team more than anything else, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they've got it working, as you said, that post product market fit. Uh, One of the things that you've also observed is startups in India itself are getting very, very mature, right? Right now, if you look at the last 15 years, starting with the whole dot-com era of Naukri and Just Dial to the consumer internet era of Flipkart and Ola to now, the likes of Freshworks and so on. You've seen like multiple curves of evolution itself, right? So what do you make of that? What are we getting better at? What are some challenges that we should still address from a Indian startup ecosystem perspective?
See, I think what is happening is we have second generation entrepreneurs. I think we have founders who have built companies, sold companies, got exit for their investors coming back into the market. Take it Mukesh Bansal or Kunal Shah, or take an example of Sachin Bansal. All these people have built companies, created value for their shareholders, and are back into market. And they are also advising a lot of young startups and entrepreneurs, right? They are acting as investors, they're acting as angels. So we have a large angel pool. That's a new thing that has happened, right? In early 2007, the entrepreneur pool, the new age entrepreneur pool was small, right? right? They invested into these founders, and now the pool is double or the larger pool. Hence, the risk-taking ability of this ecosystem is much, much more, and which has to be right. Naturally, it has to grow, right? You can't be in the same era, right? So it's as I said, I think directionally we are moving in a positive side, right? So that is a change that I have seen that has happened. Of course, there have been cases where things have gone wrong, but I think that's part and parcel of each experiment, right? You have these iterations where things will go wrong. You will learn from those things. In fact, there have been certain cases where these founders who have not done, like who have not succeeded at what they were planning to do, uh, purely either because the macros were not supporting, there was business risk or business execution failure or whatever. They have learned it and they are coming back into the market and starting something else. And again, they're successfully building those businesses, right? So there is a much larger and much smarter entrepreneurial pool that you have. And another thing is, a lot of these people who are in overseas market, US, and other geographies, uh, they are coming back to India because they see an opportunity of building companies in India, right? They no longer want to work in some US MNC, but they said, hey, I know this. Why don't I come back to India and build companies? Some of my friends, they have done that and they've done it successfully, right? So that's another trend that we are seeing, and I think that will only accelerate, right? Which is good for the ecosystem, and there is capital available now, right, to support that entrepreneurial ecosystem. So those are good things that I would say has happened. Apart from that, I would say, uh, I think one of the most important thing that also happened is the government has taken cognizance of the Digital India and the Startup India initiative. I think the government is taking this initiative very seriously because who creates jobs? Entrepreneur creates jobs, right? And you have a very young demographic, a young population that will join the workforce. Now, your traditional companies will scale linearly, right? They will not scale in a very exponential manner. How do you create jobs for all these people, right? You can't just have multiply and just create jobs for them by saying, hey, okay, fine, I'll have two positions for this instead of one, right? You have to create new businesses to create more jobs for these people, and hence I think they have taken that this Startup India is a very interesting initiative to sort of help all the entrepreneurs, help the startup community recognize the importance of startup community, right? It's more legit now in terms of of course it was always legit, but it now has a very official endorsement from the government that, hey, this is something we want to especially back, and they're taking active interest in it. Earlier, people would whenever anything to do with government would come, hey, I don't want to do business with government. But now that is not the case, right? People are very, very open to create products for government, right? Create technology implementation for government, work with government. They are now eager to work with them. So those are the positive changes that we've seen in the Indian landscape in
Right.
recent years.
Yeah. In fact, just yesterday I was talking to a third time founder, and incidentally, he operates in the edtech space, and he was, just his journey itself, right? I mean, starting from setting up a training company to an online learning company to what he's doing right now. It just mirrors what you were talking about, which is that entrepreneurs are taking bolder bets right now, and they're not afraid to once that initial success has been had. I mean, they're not afraid to take these bets as well. So yeah. And oftentimes we're contrasted with the Southeast Asia ecosystem as well, right? I mean, well, let's say with Singapore or Indonesia with Gojek and so on and so forth. Are there any parallels that you draw from these ecosystems?
Yeah, very much. I think, see, if you look at the entire Southeast Asia, that's one India,
Hmm.
right? It's heterogeneous, but at the same time, you have multiple geographies, multiple regulatory regimes you're operating in. Same is the case with India, right? So it's somewhat like that, right? Uh, in terms of the similarities, I think culturally we are very, very similar. Both the countries, both the regions, I would say, they're very, very similar. Difference is probably as the economy scales, right, and it's a slow process. It's not something that it's a a slow process, as economy, as industrialization happens, as new businesses are set up, people generate wealth, people make money, their consumption power increases. Uh, then slowly we will see that we will achieve some parity to what Southeast Asian economies are. See, India, we have, I would say, population was earlier a problem. Now it is not a problem. It's actually a market where everybody wants to come and sell a shop, right?
Right.
Set up a shop, right? So it will take some time for us, but I think, as I said, I think we are moving in the right direction. Um, Culturally, same markets. Uh, People find it much more, I would say, attractive to invest into India because it's one market rather than multiple markets over there. You don't want to take multiple country risk, right? And hence, you will see people investing into Southeast Asia, but I think India will continue to take a lion's share of investment when it comes to FDIs from global investors versus Southeast Asia. In fact, what can also happen is India and Indian companies earlier would only sell, let's say, in US, the India-US corridor. But now I have seen certain startups who set up a base in India and want to sell into Dubai, want to sell in Middle East, want to sell into the Southeast Asia market because geographically we are closer. We
Yeah.
speak English as a common language. Uh, uh, Culturally, we are similar. We can create, good products in India, right, at an affordable, at affordable prices and cost, and market it out there into high, I would say, high value markets like Southeast Asia. So we are seeing those trends also evolve here, right? It's very expensive to sort of create technology companies in Singapore and other companies because it's very expensive out there, right? You rather make it here and then sell over there, right? So I think those are some similarities and differences that we see.
Right. Yeah, there's a good sort of a labor arbitrage also emerging. I mean, the tech class in India, for example, can very well work for the likes of Gojek or Grab and so on and so forth, right? So that is another interesting trend, and the markets are quite similar actually. I mean, so if you look at some of the products and services that have done well in financial access and so on and so forth, these are operating almost like a in the same market, so to speak, a very similar dynamic as well. Now,
Yeah,
one of the markers of a maturing ecosystem is also how many people today recognize startups and investing and so on, right? In fact, I think over the last 5 years, especially, angel investing has sort of emerged as an asset class itself, right? What do you make of this? I mean, a lot more retail investors coming into this. What are the pros and cons of this, you would say?
see, I think I always encourage angel investments, but it comes with a caveat, right? People who know what they are getting or signing up into only should do it. When I was at Mumbai Angels, and I still maintain this, if anybody comes, like a lot of people come and say, hey, you know what, you make a lot of money in startups, I also want to make startup investments. I simply say, hey, when you write an angel check or seed investor check, you are actually saying that, this is the money that I write off, right? Because there is no guarantee that you will get returns, right? If you are looking for secured returns, and a lot of these people say, how much IRR will I get? It's too hard to sort of calculate how much IRR will get. You have to worry whether you're going to get your money back or not, because these are very, very high risk companies. Uh, Only if you have that ability to take that risk, you should do angel investment. Secondly, do you really know? Because see, as any industry grows, there are touts. There are people who will come and who will take advantage of it, right? So there are a lot of people who will try and scam you up also. So you have to be very careful and work with, very trusted networks like, AngelList is there, Utsav works on that particular platform. Let's Venture is there, Mumbai Angels, IN is there. They run these angel programs in a very professional and structured manner so that, if you want to invest through them, right? Or invest through some trusted sources and networks rather than just going and standalone, writing check to someone because you do not know whether you're writing money into some legit startup or not, because people do take advantage these days. So be with a trusted network, right? Till the time you learn the rules, right? Secondly, know what you're investing into, right? And be willing to sort of write off the investment if things don't go well. It's not a debt investment. You simply go and tell the founder that, hey, listen, you have to give me my money, sell something and give. No, you can't, because see, it's a equity investment, right? Equity means write off, right? It's not a debt investment or a secured investment,
It's
right?
not a
That's the
loan.
game, right? You cannot go to the, yeah, it's not a loan. So you have to understand that game really well when you make that investment. So I think you have to keep these three things in mind, right? And very, very important part is that you have to create a portfolio. You cannot just make one angel investment and say, hey, hey, that didn't do well. You have to create a portfolio. Because as I said, at seed and early stage, you create a portfolio. You don't just make one investment, because how sure you are that this is going to be the best company, or this is going to be the company that will become 10x or 100x, right? You don't know that, right? But when you create a 10 to 15 portfolio company, some of that will go well, uh, provided you keep the first three things in mind: work with a trusted angel network, or work with a work with some of your trusted friends, etc. Know what you're investing into. Only then you will be able to make some return into it, right? So that's a critical part to keep in mind when you make an angel investment. And at the end of it, I always say, when you make an angel investment, it should not, I would say, it should not disturb your lifestyle. So for example, if you have, let's say, 10 crores or 20 crores, you have to allocate a very small portion of it for angel investment and try it out at a small scale. And if that works for you, you've learned it, then you basically can increase your allocation. But only if you have good amount of assets to cover for yourself, and that investment doesn't, any if it goes down the drain, it does not affect your lifestyle, then you should do that. So it has to be done in that way. Why do I say it? Because see, investors, if they lose money, they never come back to the market, right? Investor money protection is very, very critical part. If you do not protect investors' money, if you do not educate them that this is how you're supposed to do, if they make one loss, they will never come back to the market, which harms the ecosystem, which is what I'm against totally. Because when this is growing, you want it to, nurture it really carefully, rather than, just get in FOMO, everybody's doing angel investments around me, so I will also make angel investments. No. So you have to be careful about it, is what I would say. I think so. These are 3, 4 points that I would say keep in mind while making an investment.
Right.
And
So,
most another very critical point is documentation. Please make sure that there is the right amount of documentation. Lawyers are involved. Please spend time with the founders. Do not just write check because someone has told you. You have to follow a due process for that, right? At the end, these are securities that you're buying, share certificates that you are really getting. You do not give the money to anybody else to invest on your behalf, and the share certificates will be delivered. No, that's not how it works. That's what I'm saying. All that process, these networks who run this on a day-to-day basis will manage it for you.
right. So one of the things,
Yeah.
I think the both of us would agree on is that, India has never been short of entrepreneurs or innovation, right? I mean, if you look at the way, let's say, the Kirana shops in your neighborhood operated during the times of COVID, where, you might not have found the stock available online, but this person was stocked with
Yeah.
essentials, right? I mean, things to that effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're never short on innovation. I think the access and cost of capital was the real problem, right? So, I mean, what do you see the role of VC or private equity investing in India? What is the role of these in India? India's aspirations to become, let's say, a $10 trillion economy.
See, it all boils down to the same thing, right? When venture capital or private equity money comes into a company, it goes into the primary as a primary share investment, right? That means a particular company was trying to expand into 2 cities, can now expand into 10 cities, right? When they expand into 10 cities, that means they will buy some, rent out some offices, hire people, provide their services to customers, etc., right? At the end, the consumer benefits, people over there, they benefit in terms of, what do you say, in terms of job, etc. If people have more jobs, then they will basically spend more. So private equity and venture capital money has a force multiplier effect, right? It just is not an MBA jargon, but it definitely is a very important concept where that $100 million in one company creates a large amount of outcome in terms of the contribution to GDP,
Yeah.
right? The trickle down effect is way too high. Um, a good amount of nation building can happen if you have good amount of entrepreneurs. A good amount of entrepreneurs can only be there if there is good amount of capital available. Uh, Capital, what it does is helps in building all this thing and also helps in building all this in a shorter period of time, right? Something that I can build over 10 years, probably if capital is available, I can build it over 4 years or 5 years, right? So it shortens the time, it expands the market, it creates new markets also altogether. So people always talk about, hey, what did venture capital industry do by investing on Ola? Now, before Ola, I think the market was only taxi,
Mm.
right? Or the tourist vehicles, right? With Ola, I think you created these individual entrepreneurs who would now get a car and become a driver on Ola platform and would basically earn for themselves. At the same time, when you do this thing, the automobile industry benefits, right? The consumer benefits because our public infrastructure when it comes to travel is not the best in class, right? So someone who doesn't want to own a car can now take an Ola ride, right? It is efficient for him, so he makes money or he saves money, he saves time. The auto company makes money, okay? Ola makes money, the driver makes money, right? That is purely because of some amount of capital that has gone to the company. That is what I'm saying in terms of force multiplier, right? So multiple points, it is not just touching the company, it is touching everything that touches the company, right? From start to end. So it definitely plays a very, very important role in nation building in terms of building the entire economy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I think people underestimate is how much of this money goes back into the market, right? I mean, as you rightly pointed out, because it doesn't go into lining someone's pockets or buying that third yacht for some founder or whatever. Likely, it comes back into the ecosystem. As you've seen, as you rightly pointed out, with the likes of
Even if
yeah,
Yeah. So I'm sorry I'm cutting you, but even if a founder is buying a yacht, right? I don't see anything wrong in it.
no, no,
See, he
sure,
has put
sure,
efforts into it. He
sure,
has put efforts into it. He has made value for everybody around him. He has employed so many people. He owns some amount of equity. He's earned some salary, and he wants to spend it on. Probably he wants to spend it on yacht. Probably he wants to spend it on some charity. That is his capital.
right,
But when he buys a yacht, the person he's buying the yacht from also makes money, right?
right,
And so there is a downstream effect irrespective. That is the beauty of capitalism, right?
yeah,
Uh, we should, I think, whoever earns, it is their thing wherever they want to spend. So money
right,
does come into the ecosystem
right,
in some or the other form,
right,
and this is all white. There is no black money that is involved here, right? The beauty is that everything is audited, everything there's a trail for it, right? You cannot go and tell an Ola guy, okay, fine, I'll give you cash. It's all audited because he pays by Paytm, or probably if there's cash, there is a back entry over there where okay, fine, this is the amount of money he received in cash for the ride, right?
mm,
So everything is audited. There is no way in which you can escape. So this
mm.
becomes, you're moving from a shadow ecosystem to an ecosystem which is fully transparent. And at each and every level, when you can capture the amount of money spent, then you can tax, right?
Right, right. No, it
So it
also,
does help in the taxing also.
yeah. No, absolutely. That's a very relevant point. But it also empowers a lot of entrepreneurs, right? I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, downstream, there are plenty of people who've based their livelihood on platforms, and more power to them, thanks to all of this, private equity funding, VC funding that's coming in, right? So this has been a fascinating chat, Ashish. Got to know plenty of things around investing and startups as such. What are some things that you have coming up? What are you excited about? In terms of what the future holds.
See, I think future, I think we are very bullish on Indian markets. We have a very long-term view. We have a 20, 25-year view on India, right?
Wow.
For me personally, Mirae Asset is a platform that I want to grow it into a large growth investment platform. For me, it's my entrepreneurial journey where I have to build this platform where we can continue to back entrepreneurs. We continue to attract great LP capital for making investments. We want to create this as a platform, and we encourage more such platforms to come. And we want them to be there in India, and we want them to be permanent capital. We don't want them to say, be in India, probably, just come to India, make some investments and go back. I think you have to be here. You have to set up a team here, learn these markets, and be very active in these markets. So that is one of the things that I'm very excited about when it comes to Mirae Assets and what we plan to do. I do feel that there is a strong opportunity for India here. Why? Again, I'm an obsessed Indian, and I really believe in the idea of India. I think we have the talent. We have been the oldest civilization, continuously habited oldest civilization, and there is a reason for it. I think the reason is resilience. We're very resilient people that way. And I think resilient people survive no matter what, right? And they end up building, uh, you know, huge institutions, economy. It has a far-reaching effect. I think that's what I would say. I'm very, very bullish when it comes to India. This was the reason I came back from Spain, and I said, I want to continue to work in India. Um, and we do feel that there are going to be large companies, large tech companies that will come out of India, right? If you say that India is going to be a $5 trillion economy by 2025, right? A good amount of market cap will come from tech companies, and the venture ecosystem and the private equity ecosystem does play a very important role in terms of building these large tech companies, right? And another important thing is infrastructure is something I would say is still not there yet. We will see a lot of growth on infrastructure, and somewhere I think technology can play role in bridging these gaps, right? So India is a market where you do not have to worry about demand. You have to just focus on working the supply side, right? Be it logistics, be it anything. You just have to continue working on supply side. So there's a large opportunity. So when we talk about India's a chaotic market, India's ye nahi chalta hai, wo nahi chalta hai, things don't work. I think when these things happen, or when things don't work, is where the opportunity is, and you can create multi-billion dollar opportunities, right? Multi-billion dollar companies out of those opportunities and those friction points, right? So that's something that I always feel very positive about India, irrespective of a lot of complaints that people have. I think you can always continue to be a complaint person, or you look at the positive side of it. And as entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, you're supposed to be more optimistic than the pessimistic side. Right?
Absolutely.
That's what I would end with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the challenges that we face are solvable challenges, right? I mean, if you look at it, I mean, so we have the people, we have the innovation. I mean, uh, things like infrastructure and so on, our regulation, for example. I mean, those are solvable challenges, and also very rapidly solvable challenges as well. As let's say China has shown on, and some of the other markets have shown. So before we let you go, I was curious about something on your LinkedIn profile. You said that you're a student of theology, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if you can recommend a few books or podcasts to our listeners, that would be interesting to check out.
Yeah, so I think I like theology a lot. And two of my favorite books are actually Sri Manas and Bhagavad Gita. I think these are two books that help me keep my moral compass aligned. Whenever I feel, I would say a little, I would say some tough challenges or odds or whatever, I read these two books. Uh, you can read them as a religious book, or you can read them as just books, or you can read them as poems, poetry, right? They're very beautiful. I think Indian literature is very, very beautiful. It's very deep. It is very meaningful, and it has certain moral values, which is important. Especially, see, we are in the business of lending, we are in the business of trust, right? And morals, trust, ethics are very, very critical for us, right? If we deviate from any of these characters, it's a problem. So these are two books that I would recommend. Then, of course, you should read Upanishads. I think there's a good book by Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan,
Yeah.
the Upanishads. That's an excellent book to start with. So these are three books that I would say you can read and start with. Some of the other books that I have read, again, not really theology related, but Indian history related. One is, of course, Arthashastra, Kautilya. That's an amazing book to read with. And, there's an amazing play also on that, which is Mudra Rakshas, right? So that's a beautiful play. You should read that play. Some of the other things on my list when it comes to, I would say readings are, I have to read Raghuvams by Kalidas. That is something that I haven't read, but I have to read one of those Mahakavyas. Those are something that I would say probably I'll pick it up after Diwali, because until Diwali there's bandwidth issue.
Right.
But these are some of the books that I would say you should read.
Right. So I can read, building on principles in the background, right below your, the company logo, and a lot of what you're talking about is very, very aligned in that same ethos, right? Reading all of this rich history, theology, and so on. So this has been fascinating, Ashish. I know we've been, going back and forth about having a chat. I'm so glad that this, happened. Thank you so much, Ashish. This was a real fun conversation.
Most welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roshan. I also enjoyed talking to you. I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Take care.
This episode is brought to you by Mulya. You want to move fast? Sure. But without breaking things? Now that's a hard ask. The thing is, once you have some base of users and customers, you just cannot afford to risk quality. So how do the likes of Cred, Swiggy, and CureFit, some of India's fastest growing startups, ship at lightning pace and delight their users and customers? Simple, they're working with Mulya as a strategic quality partner. Mulya is India's most talented and passionate community of testers. They've helped prevent thousands of bugs and regression issues. So as a CTO or a product owner, if you want to reduce tech debt, especially while you scale, do check out Mulya.com. I've interviewed Mulya's founder and CEO Pradeep on the podcast earlier, and we spoke about how startups can improve quality while scaling and things to that effect. You should definitely check it out. I'll link to it in the description below. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also, follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.